The rain fell like a punishment from the heavens themselves, each drop a needle against Alara's skin as she knelt in the mud at the edge of the forest. Her clothes clung to her body, soaked through and heavy, but she barely felt the cold anymore. Numbness had settled into her bones hours ago, or maybe it was days. She had lost track of time since the moment her world shattered. The rejection had been swift and brutal. Her former mate Marcus standing before the entire pack as he denounced her, his voice cold and final as he severed their bond and accused her of betraying pack secrets to rival territories. The pain of a broken mate bond was supposed to fade with time, the elders always said. But as Alara pressed her hands into the cold earth and let the sobs tear through her chest, she wondered if that was just another lie they told to make Omegas compliant. She had been a good mate, loyal and devoted, had given Marcus everything, including her dignity, when he demanded she accept his. Affair with the beta's daughter as normal alpha behavior. She had swallowed her pain and smiled through pack gatherings, where everyone knew she was being humiliated, had convinced herself that love meant sacrifice and that her feelings mattered less than pack harmony. But when supplies went missing from the pack stores, and fingers needed pointing, Marcus had not hesitated to throw her to the wolves. Quite literally. The trial had been a mockery, her protests ignored, her evidence dismissed, and, within hours she was stripped of her rank and cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back. No one had spoken in her defense, not even her own sister, who looked away as the guards dragged Alara beyond the territory borders and told her that if she ever returned, she would be killed on sight. So here she was, alone in a storm that matched the chaos inside her heart, wondering if this was how her story ended. She had heard tales of lone wolves who went feral without a pack, their minds fracturing under the isolation until they became nothing more than beasts. Maybe that would be a mercy, she thought, to forget who she had been and what she had lost. The rain poured harder, and Alara tilted her face toward the sky, letting the water wash away her tears, though it could never cleanse the shame that burned in her chest. She did not hear the footsteps approaching over the sound of the storm, did not sense the presence watching her, until a shadow fell across her broken form and a voice like thunder and silk spoke into the darkness. An Omega alone in neutral territory during a blood moon storm, the voice said, and there was something ancient and knowing in its tone. Either you are remarkably foolish or utterly desperate, and I suspect it is the latter. Alara's head snapped up, and her breath caught in her throat as she met eyes that glowed gold in the darkness, wolf eyes that held an intelligence and power that made her instinctively want to bare her neck in. Submission. The man standing before her was massive, easily over 6.5 feet tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to block out the storm itself. His hair was dark as midnight and fell past his shoulders, rain streaming down the sharp planes of his face and the strong line of his jaw. He wore black and silver, the formal attire of northern royalty, and even drenched by rain, he carried himself with the absolute authority of someone who had never questioned his right to command. Alara knew who he was before he spoke again, had heard enough stories about the Alpha King of the Northern Territories to recognize Cale Thornridge, even through the haze of her despair. They said he was 500 years old, one of the ancient bloodline wolves who had lived through the Great Pack Wars and emerged victorious when all his rivals fell. They said he was ruthless in battle and merciless in politics, that he had personally executed alphas who challenged his rule and burned entire territories to ash when they refused to bend the knee. They said he took no mate and wanted no queen, that he had watched too many he loved die over the centuries and had locked his heart away where grief could never reach it again. They said many things about Cale Thornridge, but as Alara stared up at him through the rain, all she saw was a man whose eyes held a profound and terrible loneliness that somehow mirrored her own. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," Alara whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and screaming into the storm. "I did not know these were your lands. I will leave immediately." She tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate, exhaustion and despair making her movements clumsy and weak. She expected him to command her to hurry, to threaten her for trespassing, to turn away in disgust at the pathetic display she presented. Instead, Cale Thornridge did something that shocked her to her very core. He removed his cloak, the heavy black fabric lined with silver wolf fur that marked his royal status, and he draped it around her shoulders with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man of his reputation. The cloak was warm, impossibly warm, and it carried his scent of pine and winter storms and something darkly intoxicating that made her wolf whimper with confused longing. "You are shaking hard enough to shatter bone," Kyle said, and there was no judgment in his voice, only statement of fact. "Come. My palace is not far, and you will die of exposure before dawn if you remain here." He offered his hand, and Alara stared at it like he was offering her salvation or damnation, and she could not tell which. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust an alpha, especially not one as powerful as a king. But what choice did she have? Stay here and die slowly in the mud, or accept his offer and possibly die quickly if his mercy was only temporary? When she placed her trembling hand in his fingers closed around hers with surprising care, and he pulled her to her, feet as though she weighed nothing at all. Her knees buckled immediately, and before she could collapse, Cale swept her into his arms and held her against his chest like she was something precious rather than broken refuse cast out by her pack. "I can walk," Alara protested weakly, though they both knew it was a lie. Cale's lips curved into something that might have been a smile had there been any warmth in it. "Perhaps," he agreed, "but not tonight, little Omega, and not in this storm." He began walking, and Alara had no choice but to rest her head against his shoulder and wonder what twist of fate had brought the most powerful alpha in the territories to find her at her lowest moment. The journey to his palace passed in a blur of rain and exhaustion, Alara drifting in and out of consciousness as Cale carried her through forests and across bridges, until finally they arrived at gates that rose like giants from the earth, wrought iron twisted into shapes of wolves and crowns. Guards snapped to attention as their king approached, their eyes widening in shock at the sight of the bedraggled Omega in his arms. But none dared question him as he strode past them into the courtyard beyond. The palace was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, all black stone and silver accents, towers that pierced the storm clouds and halls that echoed with centuries of power and secrets. Servants rushed forward as Cale entered through massive double doors, and he issued commands in a voice that expected immediate obedience. "Draw a bath, prepare the East Wing guest chambers, bring food and healing supplies," he ordered, and the staff scattered to comply, though Alara could see the confusion and concern on their faces. An older woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached, her expression carefully neutral, though her gaze lingered on Alara with unmistakable curiosity. "Your Majesty," she said with a respectful bow, "shall I summon the council? They will want to know about your guest." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Cale's eyes flashed gold with alpha dominance. "The council will be informed when I decide to inform them, Meredith," he said, his voice deadly soft. "Until then, this Omega is under my personal protection, and anyone who questions that answers to me directly. Is that understood?" Meredith's eyes widened slightly, but she bowed deeper. "Of course, Your Majesty. Completely understood." She gestured toward a staircase that curved upward into the palace heights. "The East Wing will be ready within minutes." Kyle nodded and carried Alara up the stairs, his steps sure and steady despite her weight, and she felt a strange safety in his arms that made no logical sense given everything she knew about Alpha Kings and their infamous tempers. He brought her to chambers that were larger than her entire family home had been, decorated in deep blues and silvers with a fireplace already crackling to life and windows that overlooked forests stretching to the horizon. The bed was enormous and piled with furs. The bathroom visible through an archway promised hot water and luxury she had never experienced. And Alara felt profoundly out of place in her muddy rags, surrounded by such elegance. Cale set her down carefully on a cushioned chair near the fire and stepped back, studying her with those unreadable golden eyes. "Meredith will help you bathe and dress," he said. "Eat whatever food they bring. Sleep as long as you need. And when you wake, We will discuss your situation and what brought you to my territory in such a state." He turned to leave, but Alara found her voice, desperate to understand why he was doing this. "Your Majesty," she called out, and he paused at the doorway without turning around. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. Do not know what I might have done to deserve being cast out. I could be dangerous, could be everything my pack claimed I was." For a long moment, Kyle was silent, his broad shoulders tense beneath his wet clothing, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain that resonated in her bones. "I have lived 5 centuries, little Omega," he said quietly. "I have seen enough false accusations and political machinations to recognize injustice when it stands broken in the rain. Whatever you are not what they claimed you to be. Of that, I am certain." "How can you be certain?" Alara whispered. Kale finally turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. "Because I saw you crying in that storm, and you did not curse the world or demand vengeance," he said. "You simply knelt in the mud and broke. And there is a terrible honesty in that kind of grief that guilt can never replicate." He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him, and Alara sat frozen in the chair as his words echoed in her mind. Meredith arrived moments later with a small army of servants carrying steaming buckets of water, soft towels, clean clothes, and trays laden with food that made Alara's empty stomach cramp with sudden hunger. The older woman was efficiency and kindness personified as she helped Alara out of her ruined clothing and into a bath that felt like heaven against her chilled skin, washing away days of dirt and pain, though the emotional scars remained untouched. "You have caused quite a stir, dear," Meredith said conversationally as she worked fragrant soap through Alara's tangled hair. "His Majesty has not brought anyone to the palace like this in all the years I have served here, and I have been head housekeeper for nearly 40 years. Alara closed her eyes and let the woman's gentle hands work, too exhausted to maintain her guard. "I do not understand why he helped me," she admitted. "Kings do not concern themselves with nameless Omegas." Meredith made a thoughtful sound. "Perhaps not most kings," she agreed. "But Cale Thornridge is not most kings. He carries the weight of his kingdom on his shoulders and rarely allows himself to be moved by personal feeling. But when he does act, it is with absolute conviction. If he has extended his protection to you, it is because he sees something worth protecting. And that is no small thing." Alara wanted to argue, but she had no energy left for doubt. So she simply let herself be cared for as Meredith and the servants dressed her in clothes softer than anything she had ever worn. A simple gown of deep blue that fit perfectly despite no one knowing her size. They fed her bread and cheese and roasted meat until her stomach protested its fullness, and then they tucked her into the massive bed beneath furs that smelled of lavender and something wild she could not name. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, dragging her down into darkness where she finally escaped the pain of consciousness. And she did not dream because even her subconscious was too battered to conjure images. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and a momentary panic as she forgot where she was. Her heart racing until memory returned, and with it, the surreal reality that she was in the Alpha King's palace under his personal protection. A soft knock at the door preceded Meredith's entrance, the woman carrying a breakfast tray and wearing an expression of gentle determination. "Good morning, dear," she said cheerfully. "His Majesty requests your presence in his study once you have eaten and dressed. There is no rush, but he is hoping to speak with you about your plans going forward." Plans, Alara thought numbly. What plans could a packless Omega possibly have? But she nodded and ate the breakfast provided, fresh fruit and pastries that tasted like something from a dream, and dressed in another gown Meredith had brought. This one a soft gray that made her feel slightly less out of place. The walk through the palace to Kale's study took her past windows overlooking training grounds where warriors practiced combat drills, through halls decorated with tapestries depicting historical battles and political triumphs, and finally to a heavy oak door where Meredith knocked twice and received permission to enter. Kyle's study was masculine and intimate, walls lined with books and maps, a desk covered in documents that suggested the constant demands of ruling, and the king himself standing by a window with his back to the door. He had changed from his rain-soaked formal wear into simpler black clothing that somehow made him look even more imposing. His long, dark hair tied back from his face to reveal the sharp angles of his features and the faint scars that marked his jaw and throat. He turned as Alara entered and dismissed Meredith with a nod, his golden eyes studying Alara with that same unsettling intensity from the night before. "You look better," he observed. "Color has returned to your face and you no longer seem on the verge of collapse." Alara managed a small, shaky smile. "Your hospitality has been beyond generous." "Your Majesty," she said formally. "I cannot express my gratitude sufficiently." Cale gestured to a chair positioned near his desk. "Sit, please, and call me Cale. Formality is tiresome when we have serious matters to discuss." Alara sat carefully, her hands folded in her lap, and waited while Cale settled into the chair behind his desk and steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "Tell me your story," he said simply. "Why you were alone in that storm, what pack cast you out, and what you want from life now that you find yourself here." For a long moment, Alara could not speak, the words trapped behind the fear of judgment and the shame of believing she had somehow deserved her fate. But something in Cale's patient silence and the lack of condemnation in his eyes gave her courage, so she began to talk. She told him everything: the humiliation of Marcus's public affair, the false accusations of treason, the mockery of a trial where her words meant nothing against an alpha's claims, the exile that stripped her of everything, including her hope for future pack acceptance. If you are enjoying this tale of unexpected protection and powerful connections, do not forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever met someone who saw your truth when everyone else believed lies? Subscribe to our channel for more stories of supernatural romance and redemption. Cale listened without interruption, his expression neutral, but his eyes darkening with each detail she revealed. And when she finally fell silent, emotionally drained from reliving her trauma, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "The Crescent Falls Pack," he said, and it was not a question. Marcus Redmayne as Alpha, council led by his father Gerard Redmayne and the Beta Hammond Cross. Alara nodded. Surprised he knew her former pack's leadership, Cale's lip curled in something that resembled disgust. "I have had dealings with Gerard Redmayne, and a more corrupt and self-serving Alpha I have rarely encountered. He plays political games to increase his influence while his territory suffers from mismanagement and internal conflict." "Then you believe me?" Alara asked, hardly daring to hope. Cale's gaze locked onto hers. "I believe that you were convenient scapegoat for crimes you did not commit, yes," he said bluntly. "The missing supplies were likely embezzled by someone with access to pack stores and authority to cover their tracks. And when suspicion turned toward the leadership, they needed a target with no power to defend themselves. An Omega mate with no family support was perfect." The casual accuracy of his assessment made Alara's throat tight with vindication and rage. "What can I do?" she whispered. "I have no proof, no allies, no way to clear my name. I am packless, which makes me less than nothing in the eyes of our society." Kyle stood abruptly and moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at his kingdom. "You are not less than nothing," he said, and there was steel in his voice. "You are simply unprotected, which is a very different thing and far more easily remedied." Alara rose from her chair, confusion and fragile hope warring in her chest. "What do you mean?" Cale turned to face her fully, and the weight of his regard made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen in a way that was almost frightening. "You may stay here under my protection for as long as you wish," he said. "I will provide housing, security, and opportunity to build a new life away from those who wronged you. In time, if you desire it, I can even help you seek justice and clear your name, though I warn you that such efforts may take months or years and require patience you may not possess." It was too much, too generous, too impossible to be real, and Alara shook her head in instinctive denial. "Why would you do this?" she demanded, her voice rising with frustration and disbelief. "Kings do not extend such favor to random Omegas they find in storms. What do you want from me in return?" The silence that followed her question stretched taut as a bowstring, and Cale's expression shifted into something complicated and uncertain. emotions flickering across his features too quickly for her to identify. "I want nothing you are not willing to freely give," he said finally. "But I will be honest with you, Alara. Because you deserve honesty after being surrounded by lies." He moved closer, stopping a respectful distance. Away, but near enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body and smell his intoxicating scent that made her wolf stir with interest. "When I found you in that rain, my wolf reacted in a way it has not reacted in over 3 centuries, he said quietly. "It recognized you, felt a pull towards you that speaks of mate bonds, and though I have learned not to trust such instincts blindly, I cannot ignore them entirely either." Alara's breath caught in her throat, and her heart began to pound so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Mate bonds," she repeated faintly. "But I was already mated to Marcus. Omegas only bond once. Everyone knows that." Kale's smile was sad and knowing. "Everyone knows many things that are not entirely true," he said. "False mate bonds can form when an alpha uses dominance and manipulation to force connection, and such bonds can be broken without permanent damage to either party. True mate bonds, bonds between souls rather than just wolves, are rarer and deeper, and they can form even if one or both parties have experienced false bonds before." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that made her shiver. "I am not saying we are definitely true mates," he continued. "I am saying there is potential here. A connection that bears exploring if you are willing, and even if it leads nowhere romantic. I want to help you simply because it is the right thing to do." Alara felt tears burning behind her eyes, overwhelmed by his honesty and the impossible possibility he was offering. "I do not know if I can trust anyone again," she whispered. "Marcus destroyed something in me when he turned the pack against me, and I am terrified of making myself vulnerable, only to be crushed again." Kale's hand fell away, but his gaze remained gentle. "Then do not make yourself vulnerable," he said simply. "Stay here as my guest. Heal at your own pace, and trust only what you feel. Comfortable trusting. I have lived 500 years, Alara, and I can wait as long as necessary for you to decide what you want, if you want anything at all beyond safety and peace." The sincerity in his voice undid something in her chest, and before she could stop herself, Alara stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against his chest as sobs broke through her carefully maintained composure. Kale stiffened for just a moment before his arms came around her, holding her with that same careful gentleness, and he let her cry against him without trying to stop her tears or quiet her grief. "You are safe here," he murmured into her hair. "I swear on my crown and my life that while you remain in my territory, no one will harm you again." It was a promise from a king, unbreakable and absolute, and Alara clung to it like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. They stood like that until her tears ran dry and exhaustion made her sag in his arms, and then Kale carefully guided her back to the chair and called for Meredith to escort her to her chambers to rest. As Alara left his study, she glanced back once and found him watching her with an expression so full of protective tenderness that it made her chest ache with emotion she was not ready to name. The following days passed in a strange and healing rhythm as Alara settled into life at the palace and began to understand the careful balance Kyle maintained between his duties as king and his desire to give her space to recover. He did not push for her company, but he made himself available when she sought him out. Their conversations ranging from philosophical debates about pack law and justice to surprisingly light discussions about favorite books and childhood memories. Alara discovered that Kale was brilliantly intelligent and wickedly funny when he allowed his guard to drop, that his reputation for coldness hid a deeply feeling heart that had been hurt too many times, and that his dedication to his kingdom bordered on obsessive because he blamed himself for every failing and every citizen who suffered under policies he could not change fast enough. She also discovered that palace life was far more complicated than she had imagined, that Kale's court was full of ambitious nobles and political factions who viewed her presence with suspicion and hostility. Lady Vivienne, a powerful alpha from an ancient bloodline who had been positioning herself as Kale's future queen for decades, made her displeasure abundantly clear at every opportunity. She arranged social gatherings that Alara was deliberately excluded from, spread subtle rumors about the mysterious Omega who had appeared from nowhere and captured the king's attention, and constantly reminded everyone within earshot that tradition demanded the Alpha King mate with someone of appropriate rank and breeding to strengthen the bloodline. Alara tried to ignore the whispers and the cold shoulders, focusing instead on exploring the palace library and gardens, but the constant reminder that she did not belong wore on her spirits. One afternoon while walking in the gardens, Alara encountered Lord Darius, a Beta Council member known for his progressive views and friendship with Kyle. He was an older wolf with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that held keen intelligence and surprising warmth. "Lady Alara," he greeted with a respectful bow that made her uncomfortable given her lack of actual title. "I hope I am not intruding, but I wanted to introduce myself properly rather than simply staring at you during council meetings like the others." Alara managed a small smile. "You attend council meetings as council member, yes? Then your staring is probably more professional curiosity than hostility, which puts you ahead of most people I have encountered here." Darius laughed, a rich sound that held genuine amusement. "Direct and perceptive," he observed. "I can see why His Majesty finds your company refreshing. The court has become a nest of vipers who speak in circles and say nothing of substance." They fell into step together, walking the garden paths beneath autumn trees shedding golden leaves. "What do you think of me, Lord Darius?" Alara asked bluntly. Truly, without political courtesy. An Omega with no pack and no proof of her innocence. Suddenly under the protection of the most powerful Alpha in the territories. It must seem suspicious. Darius considered her question. "Seriously, I think," he said carefully, "that Cale Thornridge is many things, but he is not easily fooled nor swayed by manipulation. If he has extended his protection to you, it is because he genuinely believes you deserve it, and his judgment in such matters has proven sound over centuries. I also think," he added more quietly, "that I have not seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not in all the decades I have known him, and that alone makes you significant regardless of your rank or history." Alara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He looks at me like what?" Darius's smile was knowing. Like a man who has been alone for far too long and suddenly remembered what hope feels like. Before Alara could respond, rapid footsteps approached, and a young guard appeared, bowing quickly. "Lord Darius, Lady Alara, His Majesty requests your presence in the throne room immediately. The Crescent Falls Pack has sent representatives to the capital." The bottom dropped out of Alara's stomach, and panic flooded her system. Darius's expression hardened into something dangerous. "Marcus Redmayne dares to come here?" he growled. The guard shook his head. "Not the current Alpha, my lord. Gerard Redmayne himself leads the delegation, along with Beta Hammond Cross and several warriors." Alara's hands began to shake, and she pressed them together to hide her fear. "They have come for me," she whispered, "to demand my return so they can punish me properly for daring to survive exile." Darius placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "They can demand all they like," he said firmly. "You are under the Alpha King's protection now, and Gerard Redmayne has no authority here. Come, we must hurry. Cale will want you present for this confrontation." The walk to the throne room felt like walking to her execution, each step heavier than the last, but Darius remained at her side, and his solid presence helped keep her panic from overwhelming her completely. They entered the massive throne room to find it already filled with court members and nobles who had gathered to witness the spectacle, their curious and judgmental eyes tracking Alara's entrance with predatory interest. Cale sat on his throne at the far end of the room, an imposing figure in formal black and silver, his crown resting on his dark hair, and his expression carved from ice. He looked every inch the ancient and powerful king, his authority radiating from him like physical force, and when his eyes found Alara across the room, they softened just slightly in silent reassurance. Before him stood 3 wolves. She recognized immediately Gerard Redmayne, with his gray-streaked hair and calculating eyes, Hammond Cross, whose bulky frame radiated Beta aggression, and to her shock, Marcus himself, despite the guard's earlier words. Her former mate looked uncomfortable in formal clothes, his handsome features arranged in an expression of false concern, and the sight of him made Ilara's stomach turn with nausea and rage. "Ilara!" Cale called out, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Come stand beside me." Every eye in the throne room swiveled to watch as Ilara crossed the polished floor, her chin raised with dignity she did not feel, and climbed the steps to the dais where Cale's throne sat elevated above the court. He extended his hand, and she took it, letting him guide her to stand at his right side in the position traditionally reserved for a queen or favored council member. The message was unmistakable, and gasps rippled through the assembled nobles. Gerard Redmayne's eyes narrowed dangerously, but he maintained his diplomatic mask. "Your Majesty," he said with a bow that managed to be respectful while conveying subtle disrespect. "Thank you for receiving us on such short notice. We have come regarding a matter of great importance to the Crescent Falls Pack." "Speak then," Cale said coldly. "Though I suspect I know the nature of your business." Gerard's smile was oily and false. "We have reason to believe that a criminal who escaped our justice has taken refuge in your territory," he said. "A former pack member named Ilara Whitmore, who was convicted of treason and theft. We request her immediate return to face proper punishment for her crimes." The throne room erupted in whispers, and Ilara felt her face burn with humiliation. But Cale's hand tightened around hers in support, and he leaned forward slightly, his alpha dominance rolling through the room like thunder. "I am familiar with Ilara Whitmore," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "She stands beside me now under my personal protection, and I have reviewed the circumstances of her so-called conviction quite thoroughly." Gerard's expression flickered with surprise and poorly concealed anger. "Your Majesty, with all respect, pack law is clear. Crimes committed within pack territory are subject to pack justice, and outsiders have no authority to interfere." Cale's laugh was short and utterly without humor. "Pack law is clear," he agreed. "But so is the King's law, which supersedes pack authority when pack justice is corrupted by personal or political interests. Tell me, Gerard Redmayne, did you conduct a legitimate investigation before accusing Ilara of treason? Or did you simply accept your son's word and fabricate evidence to support his claims?" The Alpha's face flushed dark red. "That is an outrageous accusation," he sputtered. "My son would never lie about such serious matters." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Your son, who was publicly conducting an affair while mated to Ilara, and who conveniently accused her of crimes that would justify breaking their bond without requiring him to admit fault. That son." Marcus stepped forward, his expression shifting to wounded innocence. "Your Majesty, I understand how this appears from outside perspective," he said, his voice pitched to carry sympathy. "But Ilara was unstable, jealous, and vengeful. She threatened to destroy me when I tried to end our failing relationship. And when evidence pointed to her involvement in the thefts, I had no choice but to report it despite my lingering feelings for her." The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly that Ilara wanted to scream, but before she could speak, Cale rose from his throne and descended the steps until he stood directly before Marcus. The difference in their height and presence was stark, Cale towering over the younger Alpha with centuries of power and authority that made Marcus look like a child playing at leadership. "You stand in my throne room," Cale said quietly, "and you lie to me about a woman under my protection. Bold strategy, young Alpha, though profoundly stupid." His hand shot out faster than a striking snake and closed around Marcus's throat, lifting him off the ground with casual strength that demonstrated the vast gulf between an ancient royal bloodline and a common pack Alpha. Marcus choked and clawed at Cale's wrist, but he might as well have been trying to move a mountain. "I have lived 500 years," Cale continued conversationally while Marcus's face turned purple. "I have interrogated thousands of wolves, executed hundreds of traitors, and developed a quite reliable sense for when someone is attempting to deceive me. You, Marcus Redmayne, are a mediocre liar, telling transparent lies, because you assume I am too far removed from pack politics to see through your performance." He released Marcus, who collapsed gasping to the floor, and Cale's gaze swept to include Gerard and Hammond in his withering regard. "The truth is this," Cale said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Your pack's financial records show irregularities dating back 3 years. Well before Alara joined your pack through mating, the thefts coincide with Gerard Redmayne's expansion of his personal estate and Marcus's expensive lifestyle upgrades. When internal suspicion began to grow, you needed a scapegoat, someone vulnerable and powerless who could be quickly convicted and exiled before questions could be asked. Alara was perfect, because as an Omega mate with no family, she had no one to defend her, and her word meant nothing against yours." The color drained from Gerard's face, and Hammond shifted nervously. "Those are serious allegations, Your Majesty," Gerard said, his diplomatic mask cracking. "Allegations without proof." Cale smiled, and it was a terrible expression. "Lord Darius," he called out, and the Beta Council member stepped forward carrying a leather folder. "Present your findings." Darius bowed and opened the folder, reading from documents within. Investigation conducted at His Majesty's request reveals that Gerard Redmayne has been embezzling pack resources for personal enrichment over the past 4 years. Marcus Redmayne was complicit and used stolen funds to finance his affair and purchase gifts for his mistress. When pack accountant Simon Carr began asking questions about discrepancies, he was killed in a hunting accident that investigation now reveals was deliberate murder arranged by Beta Hammond Cross. The throne room exploded in shocked conversation, and Gerard lunged forward with a snarl. "You have no authority to investigate our internal pack matters," he roared. Cale's alpha dominance crashed through the room like a physical blow, forcing every wolf present to their knees, except Alara, who he shielded with his presence. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories," Cale said, his voice ringing with ancient power. "Every pack within these lands exists at my sufferance and operates under laws I enforce. When pack leadership becomes corrupt and murders their own members to hide their crimes, they forfeit the privilege of self-governance. Gerard Redmayne, Hammond Cross, Marcus Redmayne, I hereby strip you of your positions and place the Crescent Falls Pack under royal supervision, pending full investigation and appointment of new leadership. You will remain in the capital under guard while my people compile evidence for formal charges. If you are captivated by this confrontation between corrupt power and righteous justice, please like this video and let me know in the comments if you have ever witnessed someone standing up for what is right, despite personal cost. Subscribe to our channel for more stories where truth prevails over deception." Gerard staggered back, his face twisted with impotent rage, while Marcus looked between his father and Cale with dawning horror. "You cannot do this," Marcus whispered. "We have rights. We have allies. We will fight this injustice." Cale's expression held no mercy. "Fight all you wish," he said. "You will lose. Guards, remove them." Royal guards surrounded the Crescent Falls delegation and began to lead them from the throne room, despite their protests and threats. As Marcus passed Alara, he tried one last manipulation, his eyes filling with crocodile tears. "Alara, please," he called out. "Tell them the truth. Tell them you know I loved you, that this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Do not let your bitterness destroy everything we built together." For a moment, Alara was frozen, the old patterns of submission and people-pleasing rising up to choke her. But then she felt Cale's hand settle on her shoulder, and his quiet strength flowed into her. She stepped forward until she stood at the edge of the dais, looking down at the man who had broken her heart and her spirit. And when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "You never loved me, Marcus," she said. "You loved having someone who would accept your cruelty and call it devotion. You loved the control you had over me and the way I made myself small to accommodate your ego. But I am done being small. Done accepting blame for crimes I did not commit. Done letting you or anyone else define my worth." She looked at Gerard, at Hammond, at all the Crescent Falls wolves who had stood silent while she was destroyed. "You cast me out believing I would die alone and forgotten," she continued. "You were wrong. I survived, and I found someone who saw the truth when all of you chose comfortable lies. Your corruption is exposed. Your crimes will be punished, and I hope that when you sit in whatever cells the king assigns you, you think of me and regret every moment you chose cruelty over compassion." The throne room was silent as death, every wolf staring at Alara with shock and grudging respect. And when the guards finally dragged the Crescent Falls delegation away, she felt a weight lift from her chest that had been crushing her since the moment of her exile. She turned to find Cale watching her with unmistakable pride in his golden eyes, and without thinking, she threw her arms around him and held on, while tears of relief and vindication streamed down her face. The aftermath of the confrontation rippled through the kingdom like an earthquake. Nobles and pack leaders from across the territories talking about nothing except the Alpha King's public defense of an Omega, and his devastating exposure of Crescent Falls corruption. Opinion was sharply divided, some praising Cale's commitment to justice regardless of rank, others muttering darkly about dangerous precedents and questioning whether the king had been compromised by personal feelings for a manipulative female. Lady Vivienne was particularly vocal in her displeasure, cornering Alara in the palace gardens 3 days after the throne room confrontation and making her position crystal clear. "You are a problem that needs to be solved," Vivienne said without preamble, her alpha dominance pressing against Alara's Omega nature in an obvious power play. "Cale may be fooled by your victim act, but I see exactly what you are, an opportunistic Omega using tears and helplessness to seduce a king who has been alone too long." Alara had spent too many years bowing to alpha aggression, and she refused to do it any longer, so she straightened her spine and met Vivienne's hostile gaze. Without flinching, "What I am," she said calmly, "is someone who survived being destroyed by people like you, people who believe rank matters more than truth, and that Omegas should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity Alphas deign to allow them. If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine why an Omega with nothing terrifies an Alpha with everything." Vivienne's eyes flashed with rage, and for a moment, Alara thought she might attack. But footsteps on the garden path interrupted them, and Cale appeared, his expression darkening as he assessed the tense situation. "Lady Vivienne," he said coldly, "I trust you are not bothering my guest with unwanted opinions about matters that do not concern you." Vivienne's demeanor shifted instantly to sugary false warmth. "Of course not, Your Majesty," she purred. "Alara and I were simply getting to know each other better, as we will surely be seeing much of each other in the future." The implication that Vivienne expected to secure her position as queen was unmistakable, and Cale's jaw tightened with visible irritation. "Actually," he said, his voice taking on formal weight, "I have been meaning to make an announcement regarding my personal plans, and perhaps now is as good a time as any." He moved to stand beside Alara, his hand finding hers and lacing their fingers together in a gesture that was both intimate and publicly significant. "I am formally declaring my intention to court Alara Whitmore with the goal of taking her as my mate and queen when she feels ready to accept such a bond." The silence that followed was absolute and thunderous, and Vivienne looked like Cale had physically struck her. "You cannot be serious," she breathed. "She is an Omega. She has no rank, no bloodline, no political connections that benefit the kingdom. This is madness, Cale, and your council will never allow it." Cale's expression was carved from ice, and his alpha dominance radiated out with such force that Vivienne involuntarily took several steps back. "What I do with my personal life is not subject to council approval," he said softly. "I have served this kingdom faithfully for 500 years, have sacrificed my happiness and my heart over and over for political necessity and strategic marriages that all ended in tragedy. I am done sacrificing, done choosing duty over feeling, done allowing others to dictate who I can and cannot love. Alara is the woman I choose, and anyone who takes issue with that is welcome to challenge me directly for the crown." The challenge hung in the air like a sword, and Vivienne's face cycled through shock, rage, and finally calculation as she clearly weighed whether fighting Cale was worth potential death. Apparently deciding it was not, she sketched a stiff bow. "As you wish, Your Majesty," she said through gritted teeth. "I hope you do not come to regret such an impulsive decision." She swept away in a swirl of expensive silks, radiating fury with every step, and Kale exhaled slowly once she was gone. "That could have gone better," he muttered. Alara stared up at him, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. "Did you mean what you just said?" she whispered. "About courting me, about making me your queen?" Kyle turned to face her fully, both hands coming up to cradle her face with heartbreaking gentleness. "I have lived a very long time, Alara," he said softly. "Long enough to know when something real stands before me, long enough to recognize that connection is more valuable than political advantage, long enough to understand that a life spent doing what is expected, rather than what is right, is no life at all. Yes, I meant every word. I want to court you properly, earn your trust and your affection. And if we both find happiness in each other, then I want to stand before this kingdom and claim you as my mate, regardless of what tradition or politics demands." Tears spilled down Alara's cheeks, but they were tears of joy this time, of hope and possibility she had thought lost forever. "I am terrified," she admitted. "Terrified of trusting again. Terrified of being hurt. Terrified that I am not strong enough or worthy enough to stand beside a king." Kale's thumb brushed away her tears, and his smile was warm and real in a way she suspected few people ever saw. "You are the strongest person I have met in centuries," he said. "You survived exile, confronted your abusers, and rebuilt yourself from nothing with grace and courage. If that does not make you worthy to be queen, then I do not know what would. And as for fear," his smile turned slightly sad, "I am terrified too. Terrified of losing you before we even begin. Terrified that my crown will paint a target on your back. Terrified that I am too damaged and too old to give you the uncomplicated love you deserve. But I am willing to be terrified if it means having the chance to love you, and I hope you might be willing to be terrified with me." The raw honesty in his words undid the last of her defenses, and Alara rose on her toes to press her lips to his, in a kiss that was sweet and tentative and full of promise. Kyle made a low sound of surprise and pleasure, his arms wrapping around her to pull her close, and for a long moment they stood in the garden kissing while autumn leaves fell around them like blessings from the universe itself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kale rested his forehead against hers and laughed softly. "Well," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I suppose that is one way to begin a courtship." Alara laughed too, giddy and light despite everything they would face. "I prefer to think of it as sealing a promise," she said. "The promise to try, to trust, to see where this connection between us leads. Then let us try together," Kale agreed, "and face whatever storms come with the certainty that neither of us stands alone anymore." The following months were both magical and challenging as Kale and Alara navigated their developing relationship under the scrutiny of an entire kingdom. Kyle was true to his word about courting her properly, arranging private dinners where they talked for hours about everything from philosophy to favorite childhood foods, taking her on rides through his forests where they could escape the palace politics, teaching her to dance in empty ballrooms late at night when the servants had gone to sleep. He introduced her to trusted members of his council, including Lord Yao, Darius, who became a genuine friend and ally, and he patiently helped her overcome the trauma responses that Marcus's abuse had left embedded in her psyche. The physical aspect of their relationship developed slowly, both of them cautious about rushing intimacy given their histories, but every touch and kiss felt like coming home. Alara discovered that Kyle was remarkably tender, despite his fearsome reputation, that he asked permission before initiating affection and respected her boundaries, without complaint or manipulation. She also learned that beneath his kingly composure lived a playful side that emerged when he felt safe, that he liked to steal kisses in inappropriate places just to see her blush, and that his rare, genuine smiles could light up even the darkest corners of her heart. They grew closer with each passing day, the mate bond between them strengthening naturally without the force or dominance that had characterized her bond with Marcus, until Alara found herself falling genuinely and deeply in love with this ancient king who had offered his crown to shelter her from the rain. But not everyone was pleased by their happiness, and resistance to Kale's choice of queen grew more organized and vocal as time passed. A faction of traditionalist nobles led by Lady Vivian began pushing for a formal council vote on whether the king should be allowed to mate outside appropriate bloodlines, arguing that such a precedent would destabilize pack hierarchies across the kingdom. Several alphas from other territories sent delegations expressing concern about the message Kale was sending to their own omegas, who might begin demanding more rights and respect. Even some of Kale's longtime advisors quietly urged him to reconsider, warning that choosing personal happiness over political stability could fracture his carefully maintained alliances and potentially trigger civil unrest. The pressure mounted until Kale called an emergency council session and invited representatives from every major pack in the kingdom to attend, declaring that the matter of his mate and queen would be addressed formally and finally. The great council chamber was packed to capacity on the appointed day. Hundreds of wolves from across the territories gathered to witness what many believed would be Kale's capitulation to political reality. Alara sat in a gallery overlooking the chamber floor, her hands clenched in her lap and her heart racing with dread. She had tried to convince Kyle to choose political stability over their relationship, had even offered to leave quietly so he would not have to fight this battle. But he had refused every suggestion with steel in his voice and fire in his eyes. "I will not lose you to politics," he had told her the night before. "Not after finally finding someone who sees me rather than my crown. Tomorrow I will make my position clear, and those who cannot accept it are free to challenge me or leave my kingdom." Now, as the council came to order, and Kale rose to address the assembly, Alara held her breath and prayed to whatever gods might listen that his courage would not cost him his throne. "I have called you here," Kale began, his voice carrying clearly through the enormous chamber, "to address the concerns raised regarding my choice of mate and future queen. Many of you have expressed worry about tradition, bloodline purity, and political ramifications of an Omega queen from common origins. I have heard your concerns and I understand the fears that motivate them. Tradition provides stability, bloodlines carry history, and political considerations must be weighed when making decisions that affect entire kingdoms." He paused and his gaze swept across the assembled wolves, command and authority radiating from him. "However," he continued, "tradition that demands I sacrifice my happiness and my mate's dignity is not tradition worth preserving. Bloodline purity has given us nothing except arrogance and stagnation, while some of our kingdom's greatest leaders have come from humble origins. And political considerations that require me to treat Omegas as lesser beings unworthy of power or respect are considerations I reject absolutely." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, and Vivian rose from her seat. "Your Majesty," she called out, "no one suggests Omegas should be mistreated, but there is a difference between respect and elevation to positions they are not equipped to handle. Ruling requires alpha strength and dominance that Omegas simply do not possess." Kale's laugh was sharp and utterly without humor. "Is that so, Lady Vivian? Then explain to me how Alara Whitmore survived exile, exposed corruption in a major pack, stood before hostile court and her abusers without flinching, and earned the loyalty and respect of every palace servant and guard who has interacted with her. Explain how she demonstrates more courage and integrity on her worst day than many alphas show in their entire lives." He descended from the raised platform, where the council table sat, and walked among the assembled nobles, his presence commanding absolute attention. "The truth you do not wish to admit," he said quietly, but with devastating clarity, "is that rank means nothing compared to character. I have known Alpha Kings who were cowards and Omega servants who were heroes. I have seen noble bloodlines produce monsters and common wolves give birth to legends. Power is not determined by designation at birth, but by choices made throughout life." He stopped in the center of the chamber, and when he spoke again, his voice rang with absolute conviction. "Alara Whitmore is the woman I choose to stand beside me as my mate and my queen. Not because she is Omega or Alpha or any label you wish to assign, but because she is brilliant and brave and kind, despite every reason she has to be bitter. She will be a better queen than any politically convenient match could produce. And if that truth makes you uncomfortable, then perhaps you should examine why you fear a world where Omegas are valued equally to Alphas." The chamber erupted in heated debate, nobles arguing amongst themselves while Kale stood calm and unmoved at the center of the storm. Finally, an ancient alpha named Theron, one of the few wolves present who could claim age comparable to Kale's, rose slowly to his feet. "Your Majesty," Theron said, his voice creaking with age but carrying weight of centuries. "I have known you since you were a young king newly crowned after your father's death. I watched you build this kingdom from warring territories into unified nation. I have seen you make hard choices and sacrifice personal desire for greater good more times than I can count." He paused, and his weathered face softened into something approaching a smile. "I have also watched you grow lonely and isolated, have seen the light fade from your eyes as century followed century without companion who truly understood the burden you carry. If this Omega woman has returned that light, has given you reason to feel hope again, then I say tradition be damned. You have earned the right to choose happiness, and anyone who would deny you that after all, you have given this kingdom is a fool." The support from such a respected elder sent shockwaves through the chamber, and several other older wolves stood to voice their agreement. Not everyone was convinced. Vivian and her faction remained vocally opposed, but the tide had turned and even the traditionalists could feel it. When Kale finally called for formal vote on whether he should be permitted to mate Alara without council interference, the results were not even close. 2/3 of the assembly voted in favor of the king's right to choose his own mate, regardless of tradition or bloodline. As the results were announced, Kale's eyes found Alara's across the crowded chamber, and the relief and joy in his expression made her heart soar. He held out his hand in clear invitation, and after only a moment's hesitation, Alara descended from the gallery and walked through the parting crowd to take her place at his side. "Lady Alara Whitmore," Kale said formally, but with warmth that transformed the official words into something personal and precious. "Would you do me the honor of accepting my courtship with intention toward mate bond and shared rule of this kingdom?" It was a proposal and a promise and a revolution all at once, and Alara felt tears streaming down her face as she squeezed his hand. "Yes," she said clearly enough for everyone present to hear. "I accept your courtship, and I promise to stand beside you in all things, to help you lead with compassion and justice, and to love you with everything I am, for as long as we both live." Kyle pulled her into his arms and kissed her in front of the entire assembly, a claiming and a declaration that she was his and he was hers, regardless of what anyone thought. And the chamber erupted in cheers from their supporters and grudging applause even from some who had opposed them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Kale turned to address the assembly one final time. "Let this day mark a new era for our kingdom," he declared. "An era where worth is measured by character rather than birth, where love is honored over political convenience, where every wolf, regardless of designation, is valued for their contributions. Anyone who cannot abide by these principles is free to leave my territory, but those who remain will help build a better future for all our people." It was a challenge and a promise, and though Alara knew they would face continued resistance and difficulties ahead, she also knew they would face them together with the strength of genuine partnership and the support of those who believed justice mattered more than tradition. The next months passed in a blur of planning and preparation as the kingdom readied itself for the historic mating ceremony between their Alpha King and his chosen Omega Queen. Alara worked alongside Kale to implement reforms that began dismantling the worst aspects of rank-based discrimination, establishing councils where Omegas and lower-ranked wolves could voice concerns without fear, creating laws that protected against the kind of abuse and false accusations she had experienced. Some packs embraced the changes enthusiastically while others resisted, and there were moments when Alara wondered if they were moving too fast, pushing too hard. But Kyle remained steadfast in his conviction that slow change was no change at all. On the night before their mating ceremony, Kyle found Alara standing on a balcony overlooking the kingdom, her thoughts tangled with anxiety and hope. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder, both of them watching the lights of the capital city twinkle in the darkness. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. Alara leaned back into his embrace and shook her head. Not about you, she said. Never about you. But I worry that I am not ready for this. Not strong enough or wise enough to be the queen this kingdom needs. Cale turned her in his arms until she faced him, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. You are exactly who this kingdom needs, he said firmly. Someone who understands suffering and chooses compassion. Someone who knows injustice and fights for fairness. Someone who was broken and rebuilt herself into something even stronger. He pressed his forehead to hers and closed his eyes. I have lived 500 years, Alara, and I have never been more certain of anything than I am of you. Tomorrow, when we complete our mate bond, you will become my queen in title. But you have been my queen in truth, since the moment I found you crying in the rain, and recognized the incredible spirit that refused to surrender despite everything you had lost. His words wrapped around her heart, like armor, and Alara kissed him with all the love and gratitude she could pour into the gesture. Then tomorrow we begin our future, she whispered against his lips. Together, as partners and mates and equals, building a kingdom where love matters more than rank and justice matters more than tradition. Together, Cale agreed, and the promise in that single word held the weight of centuries and the hope of all their tomorrows. The mating ceremony was performed at dawn in the ancient grove, where every Alpha King for 1,000 years had claimed their queens, witnessed by representatives from every pack in the kingdom, and broadcast across the territories for those who could not attend. Alara wore a gown of silver and blue that made her look like starlight given form, and Cale stood beside her in formal black and silver, his crown resting on his dark hair and his eyes glowing gold with love and pride. When the ceremonial words were spoken and the bonds formed, when his mark settled, onto her neck and hers onto his, the connection that snapped into place between them was so profound and right that Alara gasped with the perfection of it. This was what true mate bonds felt like, she realized. Not the forced and painful connection Marcus had created through manipulation and dominance, but a willing partnership where two souls chose to intertwine while maintaining their individual strength. She could feel Cale's emotions flowing through the bond, his love and fierce protectiveness and deep respect, and she sent back her own feelings in return, trust and devotion, and the profound gratitude of someone who had been lost and then found. When the ceremony concluded, and they turned to face the assembled witnesses as the newly mated Alpha King and Queen of the Northern Territories, the cheers that rose up shook the very trees. Epilogue: 5 years after the rain-soaked night that changed everything, Queen Alara Thornridge stood in the throne room receiving reports from pack representatives across the kingdom and smiled at how far they had come. The reforms she and Kyle had implemented were now firmly established. Omega councils functioned in every major pack, and laws protecting against rank-based discrimination were enforced with the full weight of royal authority. There were still pockets of resistance and traditionalists who grumbled about the erosion of proper hierarchy, but even they could not deny that the kingdom was stronger and more unified than it had been in centuries. Beside her, Cale listened to the reports with the same careful attention he gave everything, his hand resting on her knee in casual affection that would have scandalized the court when they first mated, but now barely raised eyebrows. They had built something beautiful together, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love, and every day, Alara thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her to that forest clearing, where an Alpha King had seen her crying and offered shelter. Later that evening, as they walked through the palace gardens hand in hand, Alara placed Cale's hand on her still flat stomach and smiled at his confused expression. "There is something I need to tell you," she said softly. Understanding dawned in his golden eyes, followed by wonder and joy, so intense it stole her breath. "We are having a child?" he whispered. And at her nod, he laughed and spun her in his arms before kissing her with enough passion to make her dizzy. "A child," he repeated when they finally broke apart. "An heir who will grow up knowing that rank means nothing compared to character, who will be raised by parents who chose love over tradition, who will inherit a kingdom we built together, through courage and hope." He pressed his hand more firmly against her stomach, as though he could feel the tiny life beginning there. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, for surviving that rainstorm, for giving me another chance at family, for being brave, enough to trust me with your heart. Alara cupped his face and kissed him gently. Thank you, she countered, for seeing me when I was invisible, for offering your crown to shelter me from the storm, for proving that true love is worth fighting for regardless of what tradition demands. You saved me that night, Kyle, but what I did not realize until much later is that I saved you too. He smiled and pulled her close, both of them standing in the garden as twilight painted the sky in shades of gold and purple. We saved each other, he agreed, and now we build our future together, one choice at a time, teaching our child and our kingdom that the greatest strength comes not from dominance, but from lifting others up, not from demanding submission, but from offering partnership, not from following tradition blindly, but from having courage to create something better. As they walked back toward the palace with their arms around each other, the last rays of sunset catching on Alara's crown, and Kale's silver accents, they looked every inch the legendary love story they had become. The Alpha King who chose compassion over conquest, and the Omega Queen who proved that true royalty is earned through character rather than birth. Their story would be told for generations, inspiring countless others to believe that love could triumph over injustice, that courage could overcome cruelty, and that even the darkest storms eventually break to reveal the sun. And somewhere in a distant pack, young Omegas who heard the tale of Queen Alara would dare to dream of their own happy endings and refuse to accept that rank should determine destiny. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey of love, redemption, and transformation. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had someone see your worth when others couldn't? Have you ever had to choose between tradition and what your heart knew was right? Subscribe to our channel for more supernatural romance stories where love conquers all and justice prevails. Until next time, remember that your worth is not determined by others' opinions, but by the strength of your character and the courage of your choices.